Everybody loves to talk about the best and worst movies of the year, but here are some of the most mid and painfully forgettable movies of 2024 that I forgot about the minute after I left the theater. We'll start with one of my more controversial takes of the year. I think Gladiator II is the perfect example of like a 5 or 6 out of 10 just mediocre movie. It's not horrible in any way, shape, or form, and there's some elements that do work, but ultimately this kind of did nothing for me. It really came down to me just not connecting to the characters in this story as much as I did in the first Gladiator film. It just felt like a watered down version of it. The fight scenes were fine enough and entertaining to watch in the theater, but there was nothing that really left there and stuck with me. The only part of this movie that kind of stayed in my mind was Denzel Washington's performance. I do think he was incredible in the movie. Otherwise, it's just a perfectly fine, mediocre film that is going to be forgotten to time, for me at least. I think If is another perfect example of this, like one of the most mediocre movies you'll ever seen. If you didn't know what this movie was about, it's pretty much all these imaginary friends from your childhood. Oh, they actually really exist. And we pretty much just follow like Ryan Reynolds and this girl, and they're trying to help the people that had these imaginary friends as kids but completely forgot about them find that love for them again. Just a concept that's been done a little bit better before. It tries to be way too sappy at the end, in my opinion. And again, there's just really no reason to ever rewatch this, even as a family or kids film. There's way better options from this year alone. Timothy Chalamet is a complete unknown where he plays Bob Dylan is kind of another painfully average movie in my opinion, and the only reason it even gets an average rating for me is because Timothy Chalamet was so incredible in it. He single-handedly carries my rating for this film. Otherwise, I think this is a very stereotypical musical biopic that falls into a lot of the biopic cliches that we see time and time again. Now, I'm not a fan of Bob Dylan really, so if you are, this probably worked a lot better for you, but if you're not a fan of him, there's really nothing in this movie to turn you into a Bob Dylan fan. It's purposely mysterious about his life, kind of. You're just following certain events. And like I said, I do think he was amazing in this movie. Timothy Chalamet's performance is Oscar winning worthy, but I don't think the movie itself is really worthy. I wish he won for like Call Me By Your Name or even one of the Dune films instead of this, but he probably won't win this either because the Academy hates younger actors. Kung Fu Panda 4 is a movie that I was really higher on than a lot of people when I first saw it earlier in the year, and I definitely accepted it wasn't as good as the first two or probably even the third Kung Fu Panda movie, but I think there were elements in this that were fine enough. Jack Black as Poe is always a blast. The new villain, the Chameleon, very cool in concept, and how she kind of brought back the past villains I thought was a very cool idea that they just kind of underused. She barely has any screen time in the film. So even though I enjoyed it a lot when I liked it, there's a great reason it is on this list of being a mid and forgettable movie, because when I was talking about the Kung Fu Panda movies to my friend the other day, I literally straight up forgot that Kung Fu Panda 4 even existed. Like, it took me a solid minute to be like, oh wait, there's a fourth movie in this franchise. I think ultimately it just felt a little bit too surface level and safe of a story that felt more like you were watching like a TV show spin-off rather than like a big theatrical release, because the Kung Fu Panda movies have all these different cool spiritual elements and deeper moments, and yes, they're funny and goofy too. This film was kind of just a lot more funny and goofy than anything else. Awkwafina being in it also doesn't help its case. Millie Bobby Brown's fantasy movie Damsel is another movie you probably forgot came out last year. I need her to be freed from that Netflix contract after Stranger Things is over, because I do think she is a great actress and she's actually pretty enjoyable in this. And again, kind of another reason that the film is actually an average rating, because the rest of it is just so unbelievably bland and generic. There's no attempts to make this like a cool fantasy world whatsoever. The entire movie pretty much revolves around her thinking she's marrying into this family, but it's actually a trap and she's thrown in a pit with this dragon. But you can't have your entire movie take place in a pit with a dragon. I'm sorry, it's not that interesting. A Quiet Place Day 1 is another very forgettable film, so much so that I literally forgot this thing existed until I was looking through my list of every movie I saw last year, and I was like, oh yeah, A Quiet Place Day 1. That was like fine enough, like a 5 or 6 out of 10. There's moments again in this, like all of these, that I did really like Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn. I think they're very good, and the dynamic between these two characters was very sweet. Like, some of the character moments were actually really good. Otherwise though, this just doesn't really feel as tense or scary as the first two Quiet Place movies. There's no real reason to watch this over them. I think the biggest misstep with this movie is that it's like the origin of the Quiet Place thing, but it's really not A Quiet Place Day 1, because after like the first 5 minutes where you see the city in its normal state, immediately the film just turns into a regular Quiet Place movie. Everybody automatically understands, oh yeah, we just need to be quiet. Like, they could have done something really creative and unique that separated this from the first two and showed us, oh, this is how the world was really slowly reacting to this first invasion. Ultimately, just kind of forgettable and mid. Tom Hanks and Robert Zemeckis have made some absolutely iconic movies together like Forrest Gump, Castaway, even The Polar Express. Here really wasn't one of those. Again, just a perfectly fine movie that I described as being like your grandparents' favorite film. It's just such an old person movie. The entire movie kind of relies on this gimmick where the camera never moves from this one room, but it's constantly jumping around forward and backwards in time on this one main family and other families that lived in there before and after them. And the movie's already short, but I feel like if this was even shorter and it was just focusing on Tom Hanks's family, it would be a lot better. But every time it cuts in between these other random families to show like, oh, this is what happened throughout the years, or even going all the way back to like the dinosaur age, I was like, okay, this is just too much. It's definitely like a sappy and overly cheesy movie. Some of the emotional stuff does, some of the other stuff doesn't. Again, very forgettable and mid. So don't hate me too much. Like I said, I don't hate any of these movies on the list or love them either. It's just fun to talk about these kind of mid and forgettable movies that after this year, nobody's probably going to ever talk about again. So let me know from 2024, what were your most mid or forgettable, just straight up 5 out of 10 movies in the comments below. If you are interested in more best and worst of the year lists, I'd really appreciate you clicking above my head and checking out my playlist where I go over my top 10 best movies of the year, the worst movies of the year, TV shows, and so much more.